Welcome back, folks, to WrestleRant. I'm Graham G.S. Matthews, and right here on WrestleRant, I break down all the pay-per-views that I watch on the WWE Network. And all of July and August long, we're talking about the King of the Ring events as seen on the network. And today we're talking King of the Ring in 1998. So the show kicking off with six-man tag team action, the Headbangers and Taka Michinoku taking on Kai and Tai. It was fun for what it was, an ultimately meaningless match. There was really nothing else to it. A nice way of kicking out the show. Didn't really care about who won because there was nothing at stake. Just a standard six-man tag team match to kick off the night on a nice note, but nothing, ultimately memorable at the end of it. So, Headbangers and Taka Michinoku scoring the win here. After that, Vince comes out, or Sable comes out first. Out comes Vince after her. And I guess they were in some sort of alliance or relationship at that time because she was with him in the box up top for the rest of the show. And she got slapped in the ass by Pat Patterson on the way out, which is funny because he's gay. But anyway, because I guess that wasn't really, I guess it must have been an open secret at that time. But anyway, I thought that was funny thinking back on it now. But the segment itself was like something you would see on Raw. And we would get this on every single pay-per-view for the most part throughout 1998, which is one of the reasons why it's not my favorite year in wrestling. Like I've talked about before, I've talked about it in pretty much every other review that I've done for the year of 1998, that the year itself was not a bad year. If anything, it was a great year. It's just not my personal cup of tea, just because there was so much interference. It wasn't really so much about the matches and the in-ring action as it was about the storylines and interference and stables and the authority figure and evil authority figure and so on and so forth. So that was kind of the theme throughout the show, theme throughout the year pretty much, hence why I didn't really love this show too much. But anyway, after that we had the King of the Ring semifinal match between Ken Shamrock and Jeff Jarrett. The match went all like 4 or 5 minutes. Pretty much Ken Shamrock all the way. Not really much more to say other than that. Not a bad match, but it served its purpose in getting Ken Shamrock to the finals. And the second semifinal match of the night, Dan Severn, I think is how you pronounce it, the former UFC fighter, the MMA fighter, taking on The Rock, the leader of the Nation of Domination. So it wasn't really too surprising that The Rock went over here after interference from his stable. So, the commentator, as Jerry Lawler in particular, was hoping for a Dan Severn versus Ken Shamrock final. Or rather, JR was. We did not get that. Might have been for the better. I think that feud would continue out through the summer of 1998. But The Rock going into the finals was the better choice, considering the history between Shamrock and Rock throughout the entirety of 1998. So, not a bad match. It actually wasn't really that good of a match whatsoever. But The Rock went over as he should have, so that was the important thing. After that, we had Too Much, later known as Grandmaster Sexay Scotty 2 Hotty and Grandmaster Sexay 2 Cool. At this time, though, they were just a bunch of jabronis as Too Much. That's what they were known as at that time, taking on Al Snow and Head in tag team action, if you want to call it that. And if Al Snow won, he would get a meeting with Vince McMahon as appointed by Jerry Lawler. Jerry Lawler appointed himself the special guest referee and pretty much did not make any of the counts that Al Snow got on either Brian Christopher or Scott Taylor, later known as, like I said, Scotty 2 Hotty and Grandmaster Sexay, respectively. The match, I enjoyed it for what it was. It was very stupid. It wasn't a good match whatsoever, but for the comedy, it just dragged on way too long. That was the only thing. I enjoyed it for what it was, but they dragged it on for like 8 to 10 minutes, as pretty much the same length as the King of the Ring qualifier, the King of the Ring semifinal matches, which was kind of ridiculous. And in the end, Too Much scoring the victory after Brian Christopher, I believe it was, pinhead, with the discretion of special guest referee Jerry Lawler. So a stupid finish, but it was what it was. Again, I enjoyed it for what it was, but it was just way too long. A lot longer than it needed to be. After that, we had X-Pac taking on Owen Hart. Pretty much just a minuscule, like a microscopic way of furthering the feud between the Nation of Domination and D-Generation X. So the match itself was good. It was better than the 3.5-minute match they had at King of the Ring, I believe, a few years earlier in 97 or it might have been like 94, 95. It was one of those years. It might have been 94. But anyway, though, they had a good match in the show. I enjoyed it for what it was, but just too much interference. Other than the interference, it was a good match. But the interference from DX and the Nation of Domination got in the way. I feel like they should have just had the match without those two teams interrupting, but you had to know it happened. It was going to happen at some point. It was only inevitable considering it was 1998, and that was pretty much the par for the course in that year of wrestling, in WWE specifically. After that, for the WWF Tag Team titles, the New Age Outlaws taking on the Midnight Express, or the new Midnight Express, rather, Bombastic Bob and Bodacious Bart. And it might have been Bart Gunn and Bob Holly. I don't know if it was actually Bart Gunn or not. No, obviously it was not. Actually, it might have been, because we had Billy Gunn taking on, teaming with Road Dogg here, and then Bob Holly. But anyway, though, not a really good match. The new Midnight Express did not last long at all. They weren't around for very long whatsoever, so kind of a flop. They were good wrestlers, obviously. Bob Holly would stick around in other, obviously, various roles. The New Age Outlaws, one of the greatest teams of all time, so they pulled out the victory here, retaining their tag team titles, thankfully, but not a really good match. And the New Midnight Express, the match itself wasn't bad, but it kind of served as a reminder of how much of a failure, how big of a flop the New Midnight Express was in 98, for how long it lasted, which wasn't long at all. After that, we get the finals of the 1998 King of the Ring tournament, Ken Shamrock taking on The Rock, and a really good match, and a match I actually enjoyed a lot more than the matches between the two at WrestleMania, and I feel like they had another match at the Rumble. It was one of those pay-per-views. It might have been No Way Out, but one of those shows they had a matchup, and The Rock won, or Shamrock won, and the referee decision got reversed or whatever. So finally, Ken Shamrock beats The Rock, now for the Intercontinental Championship, but when it matters most in the finals of the King of the Ring tournament. So good match here. Ken Shamrock went over. It's just a shame that in watching the show and how over he was, and he was a really good wrestler, and obviously he felt legitimate, a lot like Brock Lesnar does now, and being a former UFC fighter. But they never really capitalized off the momentum. Maybe they did, and it was just his attitude backstage that kind of held him back from being much more than what he was. But he wasn't around for very long. I think he was only around until 2000 before he left again back for the mixed martial arts world, I'm sure, or something along those lines. I'm not exactly sure. But he wasn't around for very long, which is surprising considering how popular and how over he was in the Attitude Era. But I don't know, I feel like he should have been a much bigger star than what he was in 98 and 97 and whatever. I guess he just couldn't get above a certain level with guys like Undertaker and The Rock, Triple H, Kane, Stone Cold Steve Austin obviously kind of getting in the way of that and just being much more popular than he was. But still, kind of surprising that they would give him the King of the Ring crown here, and he wouldn't really go on to do much more with it. I mean, he would become Intercontinental Champion, I think, once more. But other than that, he really wouldn't do much more in WWE before leaving in late 99 or 2000, whenever it was, around that time period. After that, of course, the famous Hell in a Cell match between Undertaker and Mankind. I've talked about this before, probably. I mean, I've talked about my favorite Hell in a Cell matches, if this match was even on the list, but it's obviously the most iconic and one of the most memorable matches, period, of all time. A fantastic match. What more can you say about it than what hasn't been said already? In that, just Mankind taking the craziest bump of all time off the top of the cell, through the top of the cell later on. That's it, he's dead. And just one of the greatest calls of all time from Jerry Lawler and JR, and just going crazy off the falls of Mankind, Taker holding his own as well, and just Mankind was totally out of it, and Undertaker deserves all the credit in the world for carrying him through that match. Not because Mankind's a bad wrestler, God no, but because Mankind was almost on the verge of death, and the Undertaker was really just kind of picking him up, and Mankind was almost falling down. He was pretty much that out of it throughout this match. So you got to commend the guy. Just a remarkable, historic match. Phenomenal contest. In the end, obviously, Undertaker scoring the victory with thumbtacks everywhere and just all that other shit happening. Takes him out with the tombstone, I believe. Scores the victory. Thankfully puts Mankind out of his misery. So it obviously lives up to the hype. And if you've never seen this match before, what are you waiting for? One of, if not the greatest Hell in a Cell match of all time. Undertaker, Mankind, watch it. Taker scores the victory, like I said. And then we get to the main event. Why that wasn't the main event, I'll have no idea. But I guess they wanted to set up the angle in this match and further the feud between Taker and Mankind, and also tease tension between Taker and Stone Cold to set up their SummerSlam matchup. I believe, it was SummerSlam that year. It was Austin and Taker. I'm thinking 97, but 97 was Bret Hart and Undertaker. But the tension teased between those two here, and pretty much all four of these competitors would set up a multitude of matches at SummerSlam that year. Most notably Stone Cold Steve Austin versus The Undertaker. But not a bad match between Kane and Stone Cold, but the first blood stipulation was what kind of made it entertaining. In the end, Taker, like I said, interfering as well as Mankind, just kind of getting involved here. Stone Cold Steve Austin gets busted open by one of the chair shots from Taker or whoever else. And then in the end, it's Kane because of the blood. The referee spots the blood on Austin's face, and before, Austin can retain the title, referee spots the blood in Austin's face, hands Kane the victory in the WWE Championship. So a really controversial way of going off the air. Title reign would not last long. He would drop the belt right back to Stone Cold the very next night on Raw, so that was kind of pointless. But just, it felt like it wasn't really a true main event match. Like it was like, SummerSlam main event or anything like that. It was more just a way of furthering the feud between all four of these guys, Taker, Mankind, Kane, and Austin, as opposed to really, maybe if you watched the pay-per-view at that time, you would have felt like you got cheated out of your money because the title changed hands the very next night anyway. And then this match, ultimately, in the long scheme of things, didn't really matter much at all. But still, not a bad match, just very chaotic, but which I didn't really enjoy throughout most of 1998, but it worked for this match. Made me more invested, more engaged, and more entertained, I guess, as a result. So good shit. Kane, the new WWE champion, albeit not a very long reign, but it was for what it was, a very historic moment nevertheless. So overall, I did not really enjoy the undercard in the show, but I did enjoy the show overall a lot more than I did in most of the other pay-per-views in 98 for WWE. The main event matches sell themselves. So I would say, a lot of the 98 pay-per-views that I watch and review, I do not really recommend because a lot of the wrestling really isn't that great. But for this show, though, the main event matches are worth it. Obviously, if there's any one match you need to watch, it's the Hell in a Cell match between Undertaker and Mankind. The other two main event matches, though, are main event level matches. Kane and Steve Austin and Ken Shamrock and The Rock. Obviously, a very historical show with Ken Shamrock scoring the 98 King of the Ring victory, Kane becoming WWE Champion for the first time in his career, Taker and Mankind, the Hell in a Cell match. The undercard, like I said, was nothing special. Not awful, just some matches weren't really that good at all. But overall, the main events, I would say, brought the show up a little bit. I wouldn't watch the show in its entirety, but the final hour and a half with the main event matches, I would certainly recommend for their historical significance and entertainment value. So that is King of the Ring in 1998, guys. As always, thank you for watching and listening. I thoroughly appreciate your support. I'll be back in my next video to talk about King of the Ring in 1999. But until then, you guys can follow me on the Twitter machine at WrestleRant on Twitter, at WrestleRant, on Facebook, rather, at facebook.com/Graham.gsm.Matthews, and right here on YouTube by liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing. So like I said, I'll be back in my next video to talk about King of the Ring 1999. Until then, guys, have a great one. I'm Graham GSM Matthews, and I'll catch you folks down the road.